What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And this week, what I want to do is address this one question that I probably get the most often. And that is, where next for the property market? There's a lot of concern around prices these days. And especially since we've breached the peak that was achieved back in 2007. And everyone kind of remembers back in 2007, it was kind of like, whoa, this is crazy. We're at this like incredibly high rate. And then shortly after, there was the crash. And so now that we're back above the 2007 peak, a lot of people are putting 2 and 2 together and getting 20. And they're kind of saying, okay, we're on the verge of a collapse. And so I'd like to address that and, what do I expect to happen in the next while? Now, before I do, I just wanted to give you a very quick update on my my mentorship or my accelerator. And October has been an absolutely crazy busy month. I've taken on 10 new members in the 31 days of October. And so that's the biggest intake I've ever had. And I just want to let you know that there are still a couple of spots available if you have been sort of thinking about joining. Don't delay any further. I've got a link down below in the show notes. You can go and check out the way it's structured and everything like that, and join this crew that we have now. So it's exciting times, and I'm really grateful for you guys for showing up in the numbers that you are. So let's get into the main topic, like where next for the property market. I think the best thing to do is nowadays you have to start with the caveat, and that is, do I have, sitting on my table here beside me, a crystal ball? No, I don't. Have I been wrong before? Yes, you bet I have been incredibly wrong in the past. I've gotten it badly wrong. But will I be wrong again? Yes, I think it's probably likely that there will be a date at some point in the future where I get it wrong and I make a mistake. And so, look, all of that being said, this is my take on the way the market is going. I think we have to begin with I guess let's go back and do a very basic overview of the laws of economics, or we'll say the market dynamics. And specifically what I'm talking about is supply and demand. Now, I know I've spoken about this before, but I think it's important to just reflect on a couple of nuances around demand. When you're talking about demand, what you've got to do is think about what is driving the demand. And it breaks down to two simple things. Is the demand being driven by necessity, or is the demand being driven by speculation? And this is a very, very important distinction, because one of them can remain persistent for years, whereas the other one can literally dry up and disappear overnight. And so that kind of distinction, it's important to just remember that. And I'm going to use some non-property related things for example, because it's too easy that we jump into the property thing straight away. But let me take you back a couple of years to 2020. Do you guys, I'm sure you all have vivid memories of the lockdown, when we heard that this strange pandemic was taking over. It was spreading like wildfire. You could see the numbers growing rapidly. And it was quite a kind of concerning time at the moment, because I can remember looking at TV and seeing that Italy was getting hit like really badly. And there was just thousands and thousands of elderly people dying from COVID. And so sure enough, the lockdown took place very soon after. And I'm sure you guys remember, like it's a few years ago now, but just to remind you, do you remember this ridiculous, crazy shortage of toilet paper? I mean, it was just ridiculous. There was these mad runs for toilet paper. And you kind of wonder, like, geez, what was that all about? But it was down to the supply chain, that people were the supply chains were sort of coming under pressure. And all of a sudden, toilet paper was no longer being supplied to the shops. And sure enough, the thing started to run out. And I also remember around about COVID, during the lockdown, I remember going to the supermarket at 5 p.m. in the evening on the way home from... Now, I had a special permit to get into East Point because there was certain critical infrastructure going on in there at the time. So I would go in there, and on the way home, I would drop in to the supermarket to get, groceries for the house and stuff. And when I went in there, I can remember taking photographs of this. It was just the most surreal situation. I was walking up and down aisle after aisle after aisle, and there was not a single piece of food on at least 5 or 6 aisles. And this was it was actually frightening. I can remember thinking to myself, Jesus, like, what are we going to do for food tonight? Like, there's literally nothing for sale, unless there was like frozen, but there was nothing fresh, nothing being delivered. Like, there might have been, you could go and pick up, plenty of junk food if you wanted, but it was incredible. And this was all being driven by necessity. Like, people have to eat. This is not speculation. Like, you have to eat. You have to feed your family. And so if there's any slight sense that there might be a shortage, people panic buy and they start to hoard and things like that. And so that is something that really, sticks in my mind. That is a necessity, food, and obviously shelter is. But here's another example. Do you remember during that COVID period, there was the medical gear that the doctors had to wear, PPE we called it, and that was personal protective equipment. And I can remember looking at, on the television, you could see the doctors putting these white sort of overalls on, and they were wearing gloves, and they were putting face masks, and they were putting visors, and all of this stuff was going on. And I can remember reading about this and sort of seeing the guys like that there was a shortage of this stuff. And the doctors were working around the clock. And thanks again to all of you medical staff for the commitment and the sacrifice that you made, working around the clock, doing this stuff. And sure enough, there was a shortage of the equipment because typically speaking, you take off your mask and your gloves and stuff and it just goes straight into the bin. It doesn't get reused. So sure enough, there was so much being used for so many weeks that it started to run out. And the government was forced to go to China and source, get this, 89 million pieces of PPE, for which they paid 200 million euro, and for which they had to send Aer Lingus. This was the largest cargo shipment in the history of the state, and it required 259 Aer Lingus flights direct from Dublin to China in order to pick up. That was how much of this equipment that they had bought. Now, do you think they would have done that if they were speculating on the price? Of course not. It was absolutely it was a necessity for the hospitals, for the medical staff, to prevent medical staff from getting sick themselves, in which case they wouldn't be able to perform their duties. And even though the government knew they were being fleeced by the Chinese supplier, like 200 million for 89 million pieces of equipment, like that is, it sounds to me like we were absolutely held over a barrel there. And if you remember at the time, there was bigger countries that were going in and they were basically getting to the front of the queue. So we'd have our order in and then suddenly, oh no, sorry, we've actually sold that order to Germany or to America or something like that. Anyway, all of that, distant memory now, but it just gives you an example. When there's a necessity, demand can become insatiable and you actually just have to do it. You cannot, this is not something that you can choose to ignore and say, well, look, the demand is too high, we're just going to kind of leave it. Now, in more recent weeks, we've had the scandal around the Oasis concert tickets, where prices rose from €86.50 to 400 in a couple of hours. And obviously one could argue that that was driven by a combination of necessity and speculation, because there's plenty of hardcore Oasis fans that would see going to that concert as an absolute necessity. But I'm sure there was plenty of ticket scalps that were there speculating that they'll be able to flog these tickets for a fortune. And so there's a certain amount of that going on, I would imagine. If we look at the prices of cryptocurrency during the 2021, 2022, 2020, that kind of period when everyone was stuck at home and they all started getting these payments in from their government for being at home. And so there was a lot of speculation, and COVID was where all the speculation was going. No, not the COVID, the crypto was where all of this speculation was going. Now, I'm not talking here about, whether or not Bitcoin and Ethereum make good investments or not. That may well be the case. But I'm talking about all these kind of coins that were being made, and there was all these like completely unnecessary items, like, such and such a coin would come out and another coin would be floated and minted and all this. And that was driven by pure speculation. The amount of people that lost their shirt when suddenly this market just dried up, when FTX suddenly dried up, when Celsius suddenly dried up, and everyone was suddenly piling out of it. These were not necessary. If you are buying an asset or buying anything on a speculation basis, it's on the hope that you can sell it to somebody for a higher price in the near future. It is not done out of necessity. And so unless you could consider, like, if somebody is, in a desperate financial situation, they might feel that it's necessary that they go and speculate like this, but it is driven by speculation. And so you have to think about this. Like, there was no alternative use for a digital coin in the event that the digital coin went to zero. Like, you can't eat it, you can't use it as shelter, you can't do anything with it. Now, property falls into kind of a hybrid because it is a category that straddles both. Like, as an investment asset, you can buy property on a speculative basis, but also property in the form of your home or your office or whatever, it becomes a shelter or a necessity. Certainly in the case of your home, it's a necessity. One could argue whether an office is a necessity, as we're starting to see now with a lot of people deciding to work from home and remote work and all that kind of stuff. But definitely the home as a shelter, as a place to live, it falls under necessity, without a doubt. So if we go back and have a look at the 2007 market, we had this market peak. And what was it driven by? It was driven pure and simple by rampant speculation. If you go back to those days, and some of you might be young enough that you're not clear on why exactly this happened, but the banks were all driven by greed. They were looking at the profits of other banks going through the roof because they were lending money to people to speculate on investment. And so suddenly, I can remember Anglo-Irish Bank posted some incredible results. They were this small little bank, and all of a sudden they were posting profits that were kind of rivaling AIB and Bank of Ireland. And all of a sudden you had a situation where the shareholders in AIB and Bank of Ireland were questioning the management. Why is it that you guys with this massive bank cannot produce the profits that this tiny little bank over here can produce? Like, what are you guys doing wrong? And so sure enough, the management turn around and say, whatever they're doing, we need to be doing it as well. We need to kind of keep up with these guys. And so sure enough, it was like a war to get the customer. So everyone started lending like crazy. And the banks were throwing money at you. And I know, because I was one of the recipients of these loans, I was getting so much money thrown at me, like so easy. Just, Gavin, would you like a loan? Would you like to refinance that? Would you like some equity out on your home? Like, this wasn't something that you went and had to kind of bang on the door and demand to be listened to. These guys were actually reaching out to you, asking, would you like to borrow more? And so sure enough, what did that do? That easy access to money and the fact that everyone was using it to buy property and take out equity releases and buy another property and stuff, it was all speculation. And it was like this vicious cycle that just kept on going and going. And you end up in a situation where the property prices were going up. At one stage, I can remember 25% in 1 year. That was the increase. And so sure enough, when you have that kind of thing, if it's driven by speculation, then all you need is one of my 4 E's, the event. The event was the collapse of the Lehman Brothers Bank. And when that happened, suddenly everyone was running for the hills. The banks stopped lending overnight. And not because they decided to, but because the people who were lending to them stopped lending. And so sure enough, the whole thing came crashing down. Suddenly, the asset that you bought in the hope that you could sell it for more, you realize that there's nobody who wants it because there was no need for it. The necessity wasn't there. Your purchase was speculative, and therefore the people who would be buying it from you would be buying it for speculation. But now the writing was on the wall that the market was falling. And so sure enough, everyone was piling out of it. And you might think, oh, I'm going to get out of the market now. You couldn't get out because in order to get out of the market, you have to find a buyer. And if everyone is selling, then there are no buyers. And it doesn't matter what price you're at. So if you're trying to sell your property at 300 grand and there's no buyers, the only choice you have is to drop the price. Now, you might have price resistance. You might be saying, no way, I'm not dropping my price. Sure. So in that case, you're going to hold on to it at the imaginary value of 300,000 while the market is dropping. I went through that emotion where I was thinking, no way, I'm not selling it on the cheap. And I hung on to it, waiting for the higher price until you realize that higher price is not coming. And then you go, okay, I need to sell this. So what's the market at? Oh, now it's at 250. So you're going to go, geez, okay, I'll sell it at 250. And you start getting offers of 200. And you're like, no way, I'm not selling it on the cheap. There's nobody else to buy it. The market continues to fall. And then suddenly you're faced with, Jesus, I'm going to have to sell it at 200. And then when you accept that bitter pill, you suddenly realize the market's not there anymore. The market's now at 180. And you're like, geez, I can't sell it at 180. And the more you delay, the more it fell because everyone was there for the same reason, speculation. Nobody needed that property. Some people had 10, 15 properties and you only need one to live in. So the other 14 that you were trying to offload were on the market simultaneously. Anyway, what happened? The whole market collapsed. Prices fell, in some cases 70%. If you were in a good area, people with cash would obviously buy that property at a very marked down price. Now, fast forward to today, and the peak has been achieved again and surpassed in this case. But what is driving the market today? The market today is being driven by necessity. Certainly that would be my argument. The need for a home is fundamental. And you can't really opt to forego that. If you need a home, you need a home and that's it. And you can't say, well, I'll just live on the street until such time as there's a price that I can be happy with. You can, of course, opt to live with your parents. And that is becoming an increasing problem now, is that compared to the rest of Europe, we have some of the highest age adults living still with their parents. I think it's up, like the average age now, or not the average age, but the number of people aged between 25 and 35 living at home is now something like 63%. Whereas if you go back to 2002 or something, or 2004, like 20 years ago, that was at 37%. So it's very, very clear that a lot of people are being forced to stay at home with their parents because they can't get a property. But if you choose to have, to get married, raise a family, have some kids, whatever it is, that's not something that you do in your parents' home because obviously the space isn't there, first of all. But second of all, it just creates tension and things like that. Like grandparents want to see their grandchildren when it suits them, not to necessarily live with them full time. And so this is one of the things. This is why it's a necessity. And like I moved out of home at the age of 21. My brother, I think, was 25 or 26. My sister was 22 or something like that. Like, there's a varying amount. People choose, because they're happy to stay at home a bit longer. They get taken care of, whatever it might be. But for the vast majority of people, the choice is, I'd like to move out. I'd like to have a place of my own. But obviously, I'm going to stay in, this other accommodation until I've saved up the money to do that. Problem is the cost of the properties are growing faster than the amount you can save for your deposit. And so it becomes this thing that you're chasing. And you're chasing everyone else's dream as well. Like everyone else is going after properties. Meanwhile, the population is exploding in this country. We are growing faster than ever before. We are now at the highest population we've had since 1846 or something like that. And so it's insane. Like the last 3 years, the population has grown by over 100,000 a year. So 300,000 people are now living in this country in the last 3 years that were not before. And yet we're building houses at a rate of 35,000 a year. So 35,000 houses a year. What's that in 3 years? That's about 100,000, 105,000 or something. Go and do the maths on that. Like that's 200,000 houses short of where we need to be in just the last 3 years alone. So that to me pushes the obvious question, like what is going to happen? Prices are just going to keep on getting pushed up by this kind of demand and this lack of supply. A report came out a month or two ago. I think it might have been Savills who produced it, but I could be wrong on that. But they went and they did this big research on, I think, the number of properties that were being listed on Daft. And they said that there was only an average of 5.9 homes available to rent for every 10,000 people living in the country. Now, have a think about that. 10,000 people and just below 6 homes to rent for everyone. So again, this is what's driving up rents, is the fact that there are so few homes to rent. And anytime you look at, if you just look up photographs on Google, photographs of places to rent, you'll see photographs of queues of people for one property. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I know because there's a couple of agents that are working, that are part of my mastermind and my accelerator. And they tell me that they put a 2-bed on the market and they will have 150 emails in 2 hours. And how do you decide on who to rent it to when at a rate of 150 in 2 hours? It's very difficult. You have to sift through 150 emails to decide. You don't choose the first one because some of these people are not really suitable tenants. You've got people that have been evicted because they stopped paying rent and all sorts of stuff. So you're looking for, it's like a needle in a haystack. You're looking for the good people. Now, at the same time that all of this is going on, you've got the first-time buyers in the market. The first-time buyers are now becoming a major proportion of the market. Why is that? Because it's all the young people looking to buy their first home. And so properties that are for sale are being bought by owner-occupiers. They're not being bought by people like landlords anymore. And on top of that, you've got the amount of people that are leaving the market because they feel that there's just too much regulation around the market now to rent out, and it's just so much hassle, but the people are leaving. So all of this bodes quite well. Now, in terms of construction numbers, we are like construction targets for the year, the housing targets that have been bandied around by the government. They did say that we were going to do something like 35,000 houses this year, maybe 34,000 houses, and that next year that would rise to 42,000, I think it was. Well, it looks like we're not even going to hit what we hit in 2023 now. The numbers that have been produced as of October or as of September, I can't remember exactly the date, but they took a measurement of the number of houses completed and they compared it with 2023, and we are below the level we were at in 2023. So the likelihood is we will not hit the target that we were supposed to hit this year. And you have to question whether we'll hit the targets for next year and the year after. And yet, they're talking about targets of 34 and 40,000. We should be up at 80,000. That's the level of demand that's there, that we should be producing 80,000. Now, there's no way we can, but that's where we need to be. So what's going to happen when a necessity, when something that you need for shelter, for living in, when there isn't enough of them, it pushes prices up and it makes people go crazy to buy, and they keep on bidding and bidding against one another because it's a necessity. They have to do it up to the point that they can afford it. So supply is still massively below demand levels. Now, interest rates. Are interest rates rising or falling? This is important because property prices tend to be reverse correlated to interest rates. So when interest rates go up, house prices go down. When interest rates go down, house prices go up. That's the general thing, because it becomes easier to afford as prices go down. Sure enough, the last couple of weeks, the ECB has reduced rates a further percent, or I think it was 0.25%. And we're on course now for it to drop another couple of percent in the next few months. So generally speaking, we are heading towards a lower interest rate. And I saw the inflation figures for Ireland were announced in the last couple of days, and it was 0.1% inflation now. So it's almost back to zero, which is actually nearly a bad thing, because the target is for prices to be at 2%. But the fact that it's at 0.1, that's definitely a good sign for us that the market has adjusted, and what was pushing up all the prices during COVID has at last come to an end. That will mean that people can afford more. they can pay a little bit more towards their house, their mortgage and things like that, which naturally enough will push up prices, in my opinion. Next, we look at the attempts that the government makes to control the market. They've introduced RPZs, rent pressure zones, and also they've created all this bureaucracy where you have to register now with the RTB, the Residential Tenancy Board. All of this is driving landlords mad because the market is no longer driven by market dynamics. It's being driven by control, by the government meddling in it. And often when the governments meddle, there are unintended consequences. And so what we have seen is that landlords, first of all, are just saying, you know what, I've had enough. It's not worth this hassle. And they're selling. They're getting out. And why are they getting out? Well, first of all, too much hassle. But second of all, the demand out there for purchasers is so crazy that they can sell it at a huge profit. So why wouldn't they? So they sell the house, and now an owner-occupier moves into the house, and there's one less rental property on the market. That is what's causing rents to go up. As less places become available to rent, the price will continue to be pushed up for renters. The rent pressure zone, like landlord is renting his house out and let's say he's getting 2,000 a month and he finds out that the house next door, which is also for rent, is achieving 2,500. He might think, oh, geez, I should up my price to 2,500. He can't do it. It's not permitted because of the price, the rent pressure zone. And so he has a choice at that point. And if he wants to get his rents up to the level of the adjoining property, he has a choice. He can decide, you know what, screw all them. I'm just going to go and take my profit. I'm going to put the house on the market and that's it. So the house goes off the market. It's no longer for rent. Occupier moves in and rents continue to go up. You can leave the house vacant for 2 years. And at the end of that 2-year period, it basically resets the rent pressure zone level. So you can now go up to the higher level. What does that do though? If that person decided to do that, that's going to mean one property off the market, which is going to do what? It's going to push rents up. Renovation of the house. Tenants move out, rent moves up. You know, this is the thing. If you want to go and refurbish your house, you can't do it with a tenant there. So you go and say to your tenant, listen, I need you to move out because I'm going to completely refurbish the house. And after you've done a substantial refurbishment, you can increase. You can get the rent pressure zone reset, the levels reset again. But that means that a tenant has had to move out. So it's another tenant looking for a property in the melee, in the squabble for houses out there. So of course that will put more demand. Rents will go up. And the other alternative is that you leave the rent at the lower level that you're being forced to accept. And so what happens? Well, the tenant that is living in your property has no choice but to stay there because they know they will never find a property that they can find at the same price. And so it's what they'll do is they'll be on their best behavior and they'll just say, look, keep the head down. Don't upset the landlord because we will never find a property in this market. The only choice they have is to stay put or hopefully raise up enough money for a deposit to go and buy a property and then you can move into your own. But the problem is that because rents are so high at the moment, the vast majority of the money that you're using for your deposit, you can't raise it because you're spending it on rent. And so that is a big problem. A lot of people are struggling to put the deposit together because of the amount that they're paying on rent. And what does that do? It just means that there's no supply being increased in the market because that person is staying put or they're looking to buy. And so the market basically stays. There's no additional supply. Rents will continue to go up. So look, guys, this is all my opinion. At the end of the day, like I said earlier, I could get it right. I could have gotten it wrong, but I just feel like we are in this situation that's really, really hard to repair, really, really hard to rectify. And if you just look at Australia or Canada as an example, look at the prices of houses there, the average price, like they're much higher than we have in Ireland. And those markets have been rising for years. So it's possible that that's what we're going to be looking at as well, just because of the dynamics. Now, what could change it? There's plenty of things that could change it, like perhaps the breakout of a war in Europe. That would be an event that could upset the market. war in the Middle East, or some crazy dictator that's getting involved in one of these wars deciding to drop a nuclear bomb. Like, there could be something that creates the instability that means that the market changes. But my view on all that, like, whilst it would definitely create a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty often causes investors to kind of like pause what they're doing. But Ireland is a neutral country. If there was a war going on, where would you like to live? You would prefer to live maybe in a neutral country. And so if you're a refugee and you're fleeing war because war has broken out and expanded into your country, where would you go? Well, there's no point in going to a NATO country, because NATO country is going to be in this war, whereas a neutral country like Ireland may actually be a place that people choose to go because they want to get away from war. So that's another potential reason why the thing that could cause prices to drop could also actually increase our population by huge numbers. Now, of course, you could probably introduce restrictions and all that kind of stuff, but I think all bets are off if a war breaks out anyway. And so I think most people are just thinking about what's likely to happen given the market continues to do what it's doing. And in that case, I think going up is what's going to happen. So guys, I don't know. Hope you found this one interesting, useful, thinking outside of the box maybe a little bit. If you are thinking to start investing in property, or if you're already looking to build and scale a portfolio, you could do worse than to join my accelerator. Join the 10 others that joined me in October. Learn essential skills needed to survive and thrive in property. And I would love to be working with you. So do look out. Check that link down below in the show notes. Wishing you guys an awesome week, and I will see you next time. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed the show or found it in any way useful, could I please ask you to take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes or Spotify. This really helps us get the podcast out in front of more people. If you have any questions or topics you would like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via my brand new school community. You will find a link in the show notes. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the projects I'm working on by signing up for my weekly newsletter over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. That's all for now. See you back here, same time next week.